All right, so we have agreed that a designer is here in order to solve a problem. And the designer's focus or methodology is to start with the problem first and then move on to the solution. Now, we're going to examine how that works within design thinking. What are the elements? And I guess most of you who might have heard of design thinking before might have been introduced to a different type of graph, something like this, where we say we need to empathize with the customer, then we define the idea, we ideate, prototype, and then test. And that is definitely how the approach works out. But I like this representation better because it's a little bit more abstract and gives you more space to apply it within different contexts. So this is called the double diamond design thinking approach. And we're going to spend some time in order to understand it a little bit better. Uh, so just looking at this, you can see some basically big categories. You have the problem space, you have the solution space, and then you have basically a solution at the end, delivering some sort of value. Now, we said we need to understand the problem. So there are certain steps we need to do in order to understand what kind of problem we have. How would we know if we've solved it correctly or not? What would we basically benefit from if we were to solve it? These are all types of questions that you understand once you spend more time in the problem space. In the solution space is how you basically design your solution and start implementing it. And then after that, you get some sort of value that is hopefully desirable, viable, feasible, and sustainable. Now, I will try to explain this or go through it by showing, because it's in the gaps where we kind of learn. And any organization you join, you will find that they have certain gaps. So imagine, for example, you are a newly joined, you newly joined an organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be a position as a product manager. It doesn't have to be a position where you are responsible for a specific problem. Whatever the role that you're in, you are going to be doing some activities that are either here in the problem space or in the solution space. So let's take a case of a developer, for example, and your job is within the company is to develop the feature that they tell you about. Now, you can see here that epics and feature are probably an outcome of the problem space. So that means there was some work done before in order to come up with some types of features, and then basically you are the one who takes on from there. And it might not be that you as a developer take on a feature and directly convert it into a solution. There might be other people here that look into different implementation options, and then after that it goes back to you. Now, I'm not arguing that that's the right way of working or not. I'm just saying that this is the way that a lot of organizations are currently working. So it might be the context that you find yourself in, or it might be a context where some members of your team find themselves in. So what are you to do in this type of situation? I am someone who gets a specific solution, and my job is just to implement it. That means I am here. I am at the delivery stage of the solution space. Now, the argument here is that you cannot change stuff here since you don't have the visibility or the understanding, and you also probably don't even have the buy-in from the organization to allow you to make changes here. If you think that you're developing something that is not useful, then that means the problem is not understood well enough. But you don't yet have accessibility in order to make changes in how we understand the problem space. And in some organization, you might not be allowed to basically access the resources that's going to help you define that problem space. Whether that resource is an executive within your company or a customer or users, uh, you might not have access to them. So in that case, you still want to have the responsibility of delivering something that is desirable, viable, feasible, and sustainable. However, the scope of things that you have access to is a lot less. So your idea of sustainability is going to be limited to the technical maintenance of the code. Your idea of feasibility is going to be limited to basically whether it is possible to code this, develop this within this certain amount of time. Now, desirable and viable are things that you're not necessarily going to have enough, what's it called, visibility to judge on. So if you're in this sort of situation, then what you really need to do, the first step that you really need to do is try to expand your horizon. Don't try to change things. The first step should be to try to expand your visibility. If you're currently only delivering, then try to understand the process where solution specs are being developed. At least understand who are the key people that are involved in this process. Try to basically maybe access them, have some conversation with them so that you understand the logic behind certain designs that they have suggested or certain approaches that they are taking. You don't necessarily want to. The main problem we find ourselves in, especially if we are at the end of this sort of flow, is that we only start moving when we have the intention of making changes. And if you only start moving when you have that intention and you don't have the visibility yet, then you are moving at the worst possible time. What you need to do as somebody who is getting specifics that you are to implement is gain some visibility on how those specifics were specified. And if you are in a situation where you already know and you have access to people who are specifying the solution, and that still doesn't solve your problem because your concern is not necessarily in the feasibility or technical sustainability of the solution. Your concerns are probably in the viability, desirability, or even whether it's something that actually solves a real problem for the customer. If that is your concern, then you need to make sure that you have visibility here, so at least you don't have gaps. And then after that, you try to extend it even further. Who are the people who are actually defining the features for you? What do they have in mind? Like, what is their definition of desirable, viable, feasible, and sustainable? And again, this is not an investigation to judge. This is an investigation to understand, because the one thing that you can be assured of is that there is a definition of desirable, viable, feasible, and sustainable in every organization that is producing some sort of solution. Now, that definition may not be consistent across the whole organization. That definition may not be archived. That definition may not even be articulated necessarily, but it does exist. And it is important to keep that in mind, because first, it allows you to have more respect to the people that you are trying to get the understanding from. And it kind of shows sometimes when you're approaching with the mentality that I want to understand, as opposed to when you ask questions with the intention of finding basically gaps and finding loopholes and putting the judge hat on, in a sense. So your first concern, if you don't have visibility, is to establish that visibility. If your visibility is limited, then you need to extend it. Now, the moment you have visibility over the entire process, as in you understand how the problem was discovered in the first place, and you understand how they came to define the constraint of what a solution might look like, and how do we measure its benefit, then you understand what were the options, if there were options that were considered for the solution, or at least what were the constraints behind some of the design choices for the solution, then it's easier for you to deliver better here. And as you basically consistently deliver better, you gain more credibility with all the different departments or all the different teams that are handling this process. And it's easier for you to get involved. Now, this is an advice, I guess, for people working within a very large organization, and people who are at the bottom or at the end of the value stream, basically they are the people implementing the solution or supporting it. This is the advice that works if you want to keep working with that organization and help them create better solutions that are desirable, feasible, and viable. Now, on the other side of the coin, if you are a manager, if you are somebody who's at the upstream of this value delivery flow, then you're in a situation where you might be involved in choosing which problem to investigate. So you might be in the discovery process once a problem is discovered by your marketing, your sales department, your support. Before the decision to invest is made, you are being contacted, and you're basically mostly involved in this step. And once you agree that, yes, this is a problem, that there is a process within the organization, once an agreement is reached that this is a problem worth looking into, then there are definitely more work that works into the definition, more work that works into developing the solution, and more work that's what basically goes into the delivery. Now, I would say if you're somebody involved here, then again, you have more control, obviously, but it is still important for you to properly know if you're able to deliver something that's desirable, viable, and feasible to gain more feasibility, visibility in the rest of the process downstream. And that means if you're mainly involved in the discovery process, then you at least need to be aware of what happens in the defined process. What are some of the challenges? You need to be aware of what happens in the development process. What are some of the challenges? And you need to basically be aware of what happens in the delivery process and what are some of the challenges. So if you're downstream, then try to increase your visibility upstream. If you're already upstream, then try to increase your visibility downstream. And I guess you can guess the next advice is if you are, for example, a tech lead, then you're probably mostly involved within the solution space at the develop stage and maybe a little bit at the define stage. And in that case, again, your job is to increase the visibility both downstreams and upstream. If you're a product manager, then potentially in a large organization, you're involved here or maybe a little bit also here. And again, the same thing, try to increase your visibility both downstream and upstream. Now, why is it that we say that you need to increase that visibility? Because problems that happen here are not necessarily solved here. I'll give you an example with one of the companies we were working with, and we were developing a solution for people who provide services at your basically place of residence. And you can book their services and they'll come and they'll perform certain services for you. Now, the assumption was when we were developing the app is that basically the service app is going to be highly dependent on having internet connection. And that seems to be a reasonable assumption. We didn't even necessarily think about it because, well, we live in a city and most people have internet connection. But basically, some of the services were provided to people in the rural areas. Basically, it had to do with fixing up lands and farming services and stuff like that. So they are in places where internet connection is not as reliable. So in a sense, a service app or a communication between a customer and the service provider that depended a lot on the internet connection would no longer work. And this is basically a problem that you would face once you deliver. It's a decision you make in the solution space, but the data to basically decide whether to do it or not is highly dependent on how the problem was discovered. Because the people who discovered the problem, they know that the service is provided in rural areas. They just didn't necessarily deem it important enough to write that as a detail in Epic and feature. And it's very easy to, after the fact, say, oh, they should have just added this, and then it would have been easy for me to develop the solution. But the thing is, the number of things that can affect how a solution is developed are too many to list out. So it's a guarantee that any specs that you receive is going to be missing something. And we know that for a fact. Now, one way to reduce how much is missing is by increasing the number of people who know what the end goal is, who know what the context is, so that at any point when somebody makes a discovery that's not in accordance with the end goal, they're able to flag it out for us immediately. Yeah.